But yeah, let's look at some sockets. So sockets are a way that you can communicate from the server to the client instead of just from the client to the server. So this lets the server initiate all kinds of things, which will enable chatbook, as well as some live video games or like updating Facebook feeds, things like that. Now, if you notice here, there are each client, in this case, Whiskers and Jeff, have only one socket, whereas the server here has to manage the sockets for every single client. So in order to make this a little simpler for you guys, we sort of bundled this up into something called Socketmanager.getIO. And so Socketmanager is just some code that the staff has written for you. It'll be available in the skeleton that you've hopefully had a chance to download, or no worries if you haven't yet. And getIO will allow you to access all those sockets. And in order to access all this, you just need to import code on your server from serversocket.js and on the client from clientsocket.js. In order to listen to things on the client, you need to call socket.on. And the things you pass in are first an event name, which is like, what kinds of events are you listening for? You're probably not waiting for, I don't know, a truck to crash into a building, but you might be waiting for a new Facebook message. And then the other thing you pass in is a callback function. In this case, taking a message and calling say back of that message. So you can imagine that these cats are just following the leader. They're just repeating back whatever Fluffy says to Whiskers and Jeff. So now in our chatbook example, or a little bit off of it, imagine that Fluffy meows at the other cats and says, "I crave violence," because that's a cat. When the server receives this meow, it can then emit to the other two cats an event called meow with the text, "I crave violence." And so this is something that should hopefully look familiar from yesterday's lecture. And because Whiskers and Jeff both called socket.on, when they receive this event, they're both going to call say back of "I crave violence." But now let's think about what would happen if we tried to use this to create some DMs. The problem here really is that we don't know who is who. We don't actually have a good grasp on people's identities when we're using sockets. Really, when Fluffy posts to /API/meow, this time maybe saying food, because again, cats, and wants to send this just to Whiskers. It's a secret message that we don't want Jeff to see for some reason. Jeff isn't allowed to have food. We would somehow want to send another meow here to Whiskers and not Jeff. But if we think about it, io.emit is public. This is what we used last time. We also tried to describe it as like shouting to everyone who's connected to the server. And so that means no matter what we do, all this information is going to go to Jeff as well, and Jeff can listen if they want to. So let's break down what's going on behind the scenes if we were using socketmanager.getio.emit, this shouting to everyone, and see if we can modify it so that we can just talk to one person. If we look behind the scenes, this getIO object is, again, that bundle of sockets, and it's sort of an abstraction that we're using to manage all of them. But behind the scenes, there's two individual sockets here, Whiskers socket and Jeff's socket. But really, these are not actually labeled. Really, the IO object just has a list of sockets, and it doesn't know whose is whose. So these are, all some unlabeled sockets. However, when when we emit something now to socketmanager.getio.emit, it then actually calls socket.emit on each of these individual sockets inside this IO object. And again, the problem is that we don't know how to find just Whiskers socket and not Jeff's. However, Whiskers actually knows which socket they're on, because when we initially connect Whiskers and the server, the socket, we can actually tell Whiskers what socket they're on. Then we can have Whiskers send that information back to the server with a post request. In this case, we've called this post request API/init socket. And Whiskers basically just says, hi, I'm using socket 1. You should trust that that's me. And of course, you shouldn't really trust that that's them. So how do you verify that this is Whiskers? Does anyone remember from the auth lecture yesterday? There should be something that we can access on the server that can tell us whether the request is really coming from Whiskers. Yeah. It does probably indirectly, yes, but it probably indirectly has to do with caching. But I'm more looking for something that we can actually access. Should be rec.something. Yeah, back there. Yes, that's also correct. I think I'm looking for a specific bit of code, if you can remember from yesterday. Should just be like one variable, essentially. Okay. Yeah, and the way that we actually access that, and the way that I want you to remember, because it's super easy and it makes your life a lot easier, is rec.user. Whenever the server is handling a request, a GET request or a POST request, we've written code that automatically creates this variable called rec.user. And so if the person who made the request is logged in, that object will be their user object in the database. If they're not logged in, it'll be undefined. And so this makes it so that you can actually check, is this person who they say they are? Yeah.
What keeps Jeff from also saying, I'm on socket 1?
That's a great question. The answer is none. Right now, we have sort of a sort of weak security here. The only thing that really helps us here is that these sockets are actually numbered 1 and 2. They're really numbered based on random 64-bit integers, which means that it's really unlikely for Jeff to be able to correctly guess another existing socket number. However, it's not impossible. And if you really want to be security conscious, probably rewrite our code, since we sort of chose this as the simplest solution, not the safest solution. Oh, yes. Sorry, I will try to repeat the question. The question was just why can't Jeff say, hey, I'm on socket 1 too? And the reason is just because these aren't actually numbers. They're longer 64-bit integers. Yeah, so with this, when Whiskers says that they're on socket 1, we can now make an association between Whiskers and socket 1. So we can look this up later. And the way we do this is by calling Socketmanager.addUser. I think you guys will have to do this in this workshop, but you won't actually have to do this in your own code because we've done it for you in the skeleton. I just want you to know how it works because it will sort of affect how you move forward with your own socket code if you're using that in your project. So now that we've created this mapping from the user Whiskers to the socket, we can now actually consider these labeled sockets. We know whose is whose. And so when Fluffy sends a request to meow food to just Whiskers, we can do Socketmanager.getSocket from user ID, another function we've created for you, which will just look up that socket and get us Whiskers socket, and we can now emit just that socket and send a direct message just to Whiskers. Is that cool with everybody? I got a gauge from totally with it, a little bit confused. Awesome. Sounds good. All right, so that's pretty much everything you'll really need to learn about sockets. It's just going to be a little bit confusing trying to figure out where this all fits in and how can you use it in a web app realistically. And that's what we're sort of going to cover in today's workshop. If you want to get a little bit more context or review some of the stuff that I'm about to introduce, you can go ahead and go to weblab.2/chatbookdocs, and that will give you other information on how we're doing the setup for this workshop. And if you want a more general socket guide that will help you remember these things on the slide, you can go to weblab.2/socketguide. All right, so we're all ready to create some VMs, but we need to figure out the plan so that we actually, write a coherent web app. Let's go ahead and look at an example, the example that we wrote before on weblab.2/example. If we look here, sorry, I'm going to hide this. So if we look in the chat book tab on this website, we can see that we have this list of users on the left. We have sort of a chat area on the right here that you built yesterday. And when people log in, they automatically pop up in this left column, and we can click on them and chat with them. So I'll chat with Claire. Hello. You're good, you don't have to respond. I just want to show the overall layout and what this all means. So we're going to have this chat list on the left that we can click on, and we can choose who we want to chat with. This will be known as the active chat. And these are the active users because they're all online. So going back to the slides, we can think about it sort of as this component tree. You can see all the stuff from last week about Catbook on the left. And as another page inside of Catbook, we have this Chatbook page. Now, all the stuff that you built yesterday is this, this chat component here. And what we're going to look at today is mainly Chatbook and the chat list on the left, as well as the single user objects inside of, or components inside of them. So if we focus here, we can sort of break down what we want to be the props and state of these components. And we've actually done this for you already. So you can see here, the app tells Chatbook the user's ID, so that way we know if they're logged in and we know who they are. Chatbook has a state called active chat, which has all the data about the chat itself. And we also now are going to add a new state called active users, which will keep track of which users should be in that column on the left. Then we're going to have a chat list where we're going to show all the different users. Essentially to it, we're going to pass props of a callback function to set who we're chatting with. So we can change like which chat we're in just by clicking on it, and enough information just to render the chat list. And finally, inside of the chat list, each of those single users on the left are going to be taking in props to set the active user to that person, which user they are, and whether or not they're currently active, so that way we can show this little highlight that you see here on all chat. And here you can see some of the data type definitions that we're using here. And if you want to go back and look at them, they should be on those slides as well as on weblab.2/chatbook-docs. Taking a look at how the backend is going to be structured. Whenever we make a socket connection, as we said earlier, we're going to do this API/init socket, just to tell the server that we're connected, we're online, and we should be counted as one of these active users. And so therefore, we're going to have to make this init socket endpoint here. In addition, whenever we log in, we're also going to send this init socket message. This is because we don't know whether the user is going to log in or their sockets are going to connect first. And depending on that order, we still want to make sure that API/init socket is called no matter what. And it actually doesn't hurt to call it twice in a row. We made sure that way that if you call it extra times, there's absolutely no harm. So now, whenever anyone connects to API/init socket, this is actually going to cause the server to emit another event called active users. And so this is how the chat list that we had back here is going to live update. So whenever someone connects, we're going to emit this active users event. And it's going to have a list of all the users who are currently active. How's everyone with that so far? And how's the speed so far? Do you want me to slow down, speed up? This for stay the same, this for speed up. Awesome. All right, so the other kind of request that we're going to have is to actually just manually grab a bunch of users. So this, you can imagine that we'd want to do this the moment you first log into Chatbook. You don't want to wait for someone else to log in order to know who's online. So we're going to also make a GET request here to instantly grab all these users. And with that, we have pretty much the whole structure of this workshop. So let's jump into coding. Can everybody please make sure to CD into Catbook React? And then because I literally just updated this code last night, can you make sure to run git fetch, then git reset -- hard to make sure to clear all your changes, then check out to W9 starter and npm install just for good measure to make sure we're all up to speed. For this first portion of the workshop, I'm going to be coding, and then you guys will take over for most of the second half of the workshop. So you can go ahead and start your server and hot loader, but no need to feel rushed about it. All right. So let's jump into the code. So I'm going to make sure I'm already running my hot loader and my server, and I'm going to make sure that I am on the right branch. How's this text size for everyone? Is it too small? Cool. Please let me know if you can't see anything. All right, so to start with, just so you know, we've added these nice to-dos everywhere in the code. So if you want to know what we're going to be coding on each step, you can just search up to-do in this little search bar on the left. And you can see also the files and sort of the place in the abstract tree of this project where we're going to be working on the side slides. Well, to start with, we are going to go to api.js. And we are going to actually define the init socket endpoint, just so you can see how it's all done. So in this endpoint, we're going to say you have to be logged in order for this to even matter, because otherwise we don't have a name to associate you with. The whole point of this endpoint is to associate a name with a socket, or really a user with a socket. So if you are logged in, then we can say Socketmanager.add user and pass in the user object and socket.get Socketmanager.get socket from socket ID. And so this will essentially let us turn that number that the user sent over into an actual socket. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. How is this? For people in the back, is that okay? Awesome. Yeah, so we'll get socket from socket ID and pass in what the user sent over. So the user will send over this socket ID and we'll be able to log in. And now whenever they log in or connect to socket, they will be able to send this request and we'll register who they are. As the next step, and sort of as a hint here for how to use VS Code efficiently, if you press Control or Command P, depending on your operating system, you can sort of jump to a file and even a line number. So if we actually type in here app.js, we can jump to app.js without having to find it in the left bar. So if we now look in app.js, what we can do is we can actually make this call to init socket. So here we can make a post request. And we'll pass in the socket ID. And so this will just make sure that when we log in, we automatically do that. You don't have to follow this, but just so you're aware, in client socket.js, we actually automatically connect you as soon as socket connects. We automatically call this init socket. So just to clear things up, that's where the other call is, since I said there were two. So with that, if you want to get all these changes, I know this was a pretty small step, but you can check out to W9-step1. And of course, I didn't get reset hard. Check out W9-step1. Cool. And so now we just have exactly the same stuff. For the next step, we're sort of going to be filling in the actual components. If we want to see what the page currently looks like, I'll be looking here, and we can see that currently we just have the chat from yesterday and a blank space where the user list is supposed to be. So we want to actually build up this user list and the single user and all of those components. So if we look here, we're first going to go to Command P single user.js. And we're going to fill in this render step. Now, I don't want to be writing a ton of HTML up here because that's boring. So I am actually just going to copy paste this from my handy notes. And so what we can see is going on here is, depending on whether the user is active or not, we're going to change the class of this HTML element. That way we can get this nice highlight in the background. And when we click on this single user in the chat list, it's going to set that user as the active chat. Moving on from there, if we go Command P to chatlist.js, we can see that we need to do this as well. And again, I don't really want to be live coding a ton of HTML. So I'm just going to copy this in for you. So here we can see that we have a little header here. And then for each of the users that are passed in, so these this users prop, you can see here, is described as an array of user objects. And so for each user object, we're going to create a single user. And we're going to pass in, don't do this actually. This is sort of bad form, but in this case, it's okay for complicated reasons. In general, you shouldn't use an index as a key. Do what we say, not what we do. And we also pass in how to set that user as active, the user itself, and whether this user is the active user or not. So the chat list component is actually pretty simple, and sort of this is the whole benefit of using React, is that we can have really simple components combined together to make something pretty nice. And then finally, for this step, we are going to go to chatbook. And we're going to add in a new state to handle all these active users that we're just adding now. So we never had, we only had all chat last time, if you remember, whose user object is up here. And instead of that, we'd like to have a live updating list. So we can create a new state called active users. And I wish I could type. And we'll initially set this list to be empty, just because to start, we don't really have any active users. You could also put all chat in here, and that would be fine. And then one final update that I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to create just the structure of a a new method that we're going to be using later, but we're not really going to flesh out yet. So this is the set active user method that we're going to be passing into chatbook and single user. And we're going to define it like this. And for now, we're not actually going to set the active user. For now, we'll just console.log. And I'm using the backtick here so that I can get a format string and setting the active user to user.name. And so for now, whenever we try to click on somebody, we'll just see a console.log. They're not going to actually change yet. Of course, we can't test this out yet because we haven't even rendered the chat list. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page, can you go ahead and git reset -- hard and git checkout w9 step 2. And that'll go ahead and catch you up and update the to-dos in your code. How's everyone so far? Does this all make sense? Awesome. So the next step is actually you guys coding. What we're going to look at is step 3 here, trying to add the chat list component into chatbook. This is sort of your warm up for the day. Hopefully this all looks relatively familiar and you can figure out what the props are. So try and go to chatbook.js, line 86. You'll see a to-do there. And you can try inserting chat list. Make sure if you don't know what props to pass into the chat list, try going to chatlist.js. You should see the documentation there, and you should see the code using those props. How are y'all feeling about this? Is this comfortable? A little bit annoying? You know, something that feels too new? How are you feeling about React in general? I'll give you a couple more minutes. All right, how's everyone feeling Can you raise your hand if you like just another minute or so? Cool, no problem. And one thing I want to clarify, something that's just sort of a little confusing mistake on our part, is we're sort of using active, the word active, to mean two different things. We have active users, meaning just everyone who's online, everyone who's going to appear in that left bar. And then we also mean active as in the chat that we currently have open, the one that's highlighted and that we're actually talking to. I'll try and keep those straight and remind y'all if there's any confusion, but please let me know if it's not clear. All right, I think for the sake of time, I may just move onward. Hopefully y'all have had a chance to try this out yourself. But if we go back to the code, you can see here we want to add the chat list component where this to do is. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And in its place, I'm going to write chat list. You can see it appears here, and we've imported it at the top of the file. And we're going to pass in some props. So we're going to pass in the set active user. This is the chat that we're actually talking to. And it's a function to set which one we actually mean. And we're going to pass in the function of the same name that we just defined in the last step. We're also going to pass in the ID of the user who's currently logged in. We're going to pass in the list of active users. And we're going to pass in the user whose chat is currently open, which again, sorry for calling it active. That's our bad. But this will be active chat dot recipient. So this is the person, the chat that's currently active. We want to know who we're chatting with in that chat. And so it'll either be a person we're direct messaging or it'll be all chat. Yeah. And so if you want to go ahead and catch up, you can go ahead and git reset -- hard and git checkout w9 step 3 to go ahead and get the same code as I have here. And if we take a look in the browser, we can see that we now have this list here, at least the header of the list. There's currently no data in it, which is sort of unfortunate. And this is something I actually want you guys to fix. So if you make sure to git reset hard and git checkout to W9 step 3, and try and implement the API/active users endpoint in API.js. The thing we want to do here is just send back an object with all the people who are currently online. And I briefly mentioned how to do this earlier in the workshop, but if you'd like a few notes on how to do it, you can go ahead and go to weblab.2/socket guide, and that will hopefully give you a hint. You can also go ahead and look at some of the code in serversocket.js to see how you might approach this problem.
When it gets pushed back to the middle. What the fuck was that? The bishop is now under attack. When it gets
All right, how are you feeling on this? Sort of hard for me to tell where you're at, if you're done or if you're still working. So can you go ahead and raise your hand if you want another minute? Cool, I think just another minute, and then we might have to move forward. All right, hopefully you'll have had a chance to take a look at that. Oops. Yeah, if we want to go ahead and try and code this up, making sure we're on W9 step 3 for the branch. We can go ahead and command P to api.js. And in fact, you can command P to go to the exact line number I said, which was 103. So command P and then a colon and then 103 will take you to line 103, if that's at all interesting. And now instead of this to do here, we can do res.send, which is how we respond to a request. And in there, we can include something called active users, which will have data from Socketmanager .get all connected users. And if we go ahead and take a look here, I have to re-log in. I don't know why. Somehow Google Auth changed, so that way we have to log in each time. And this is not showing up yet just because we haven't actually made the request yet, which is something I'll do just in the next step. So if we want to go ahead and git reset -- hard and git checkout W9 step 4, just to get all caught up with me. And now if we go ahead and go back to Chatbook, we can see here that we actually have a new use effect here that's been created. And we're going to want to use this to load in the message history. Now, just to sort of explain what we're doing here, we notice this empty array at the end here. And as a reminder, this just means that there are no dependencies. So this use effect will only run at the very beginning when Chatbook first loads. It'll also run if you click on the feed component or the home page of Catbook, go back to the feed. So that will unload Chatbook. And then if you go back to chat, it will do this again. So in here, what we're actually going to want to do is make a GET request. And we're going to get exactly the endpoint that y'all just made. So we're going to get /API/active users. And we're going to, if you remember, this returns a promise. And with promises, you can say .then. We'll go over a little bit more about promises tomorrow, I believe, with Noah. And inside of the .then, you can pass in a function that takes some data. And it's going to look at whether or not the user is logged in. So if the user is not logged in, we're actually not going to show them this data because we want them to log in. And I also think we can't even actually successfully call this endpoint if they're not logged in. But just for good measure and to deal with a race condition that I'll leave off for now. You can ask me about after the lecture if you want. We're going to check that props.user_id exists. So this means that the user is logged in. And if so, we're going to set the active users, plural, meaning the people in the panel on the left, the chat list. And we're going to set that to be all chat .concat data.active users. And so what this is doing is essentially it's taking whatever list of active users from the server, so the people who are logged in, and we're going to add in all chat to it. So this just makes sure that all chat always shows up as the first thing in the list on the left side of chat book. So now if we go ahead and look at this in the browser, if you want my code, you can go ahead and check out to W9-step 5. And if I go ahead and sign in, we still don't see anything. That's a little weird. Get request failed with error, internal server error. So it looks like something crashed in my server a little while ago. If you ever get something that you don't understand, a good first attempt is just to restart the server. So I'm starting it here and it looks like it is not crashing. So that's good. And I still get an error, which means it's time for some live debugging. Everyone's favorite part of the workshop. And we see socket is not defined, which I think is because I might have forgotten in an older version of the class, we called it socket instead of Socketmanager. And I think I might have used the wrong one. Yeah, so here instead of socket.getAllConnectedUsers, I should have written Socketmanager. .getAllConnectedUsers. So hopefully this won't be a problem for you guys, but apparently I just forgot to update it in the code. So sorry about that. So if we go ahead now and look here, we'll see the server is running again successfully. And if we reload this page without the dev console, I still get an error. Okay, so this is actually, I forgot, this is actually something that we haven't gotten to yet. Currently, if we actually go off of chatbook and we switch back, we can actually see that there's a chat list now. It doesn't do anything, but it's there. But we had to switch off of the page. If you just reload the page, it's actually not going to show up. And this is sort of because the get active users API request is going to complete before we finish re-logging in when we reload the page. So it's going to think we're logged out. And we'll fix this just momentarily, actually with some sockets. So the way I want you to do this is actually, we're just going to handle user connections in general. And this is going to fix this problem from the previous step. So I want you guys now to go ahead and try to use socket.on in exactly the same way as last workshop to try and catch the active users event. So again, I mentioned at the beginning that this event is emitted from the server every time any user logs in or connects to sockets, or disconnects, in fact. And so this will make sure that we're always up to date. And in fact, this event is even emitted when you connect. So if you're the one who logged in, you'll then get a socket event, active users, telling you that you logged in and you're now one of the active users. So we'll use that to deal with this refresh problem. So why don't we take a few minutes to work on this? So just to reiterate that problem I just showed you, what's currently happening is that if you just refresh the page, the sidebar doesn't show up. But if you switch to a different component or refresh the page on a different component, like the feed page or the profile page, and then you click on Chatbook, then the sidebar shows up. So this is one of the things you can look to be resolved when you've successfully completed this step. And again, make sure that you're on W9-Step 5 and going to Chatbook.js line 85. Also, as a quick update, I think, if you don't mind, we're going to go a little bit late on this section, maybe ending about 12:50, but we should still be able to give you like a 40, 45-minute lunch. So hopefully that's not a problem. All right, how's everyone doing on a scale from all done to need a little more time? All right, we can take just a minute or two more, I think. If there's anything you're confused about, feel free to raise your hand. One of the other staff members or I can come help you, and you might bring up something that everyone else is thinking.
another 500 server error.
If you kind of look at the server, right there, the property. So looks like that. I don't think it's actually you know, those ways that it's become stacking the case of 500 circulars, as long as they're not ones that are on the class that use the so this is roughly that. Yeah, so the question there was about a 500 internal server error appearing in the browser console. And just so you know, that's not always a problem. In fact, some of the socket code we've written will error sometimes, and it will be completely harmless. So don't freak out unless something on the page is actually behaving abnormal. Can I get a sense, if you raise your hand if you would like another minute? Awesome, I think we can move on then. So if we go ahead and I think I need to git reset -- hard and git check out w9 step 5. So that I'm in the same place that you guys are. And oops, I sort of skipped a step. Step 4. Yeah, pretend you didn't see that. I'm gonna go ahead and oh, wait. No, I was at the right place. Never mind, I'm just confused. Sorry about that. Yeah, if we go ahead and try and add a new socket.on, if you remember, this is a sort of a function call that has a side effect, which means that it should always go inside of a use effect. So we're going to add a new use effect here. And hopefully all of you were able to figure out how to do this. So we're going to, oops, again, I can't type. We're going to create a new function here that takes no parameters. And we're going to go ahead and create a callback inside of it. Or actually, we can just directly call socket.on. So socket.on active users. And then we're going to pass in a callback that takes in some data. And we're going to use that data to set the active users to the exact same thing as with the GET request. So all chat dot concat data active users. And now we could just leave it at this. However, there's one sort of annoying error that we'd like to avoid here, where if I log in as another user on this account, I'm going to be on the left side of the screen, I'm going to be Buka Buka. It looks like by random chance it didn't happen this time, but we can sometimes or we can get an error here if I switch tabs here. on the right side. If I switch tabs, what this has done is it's actually created a second socket.on. So if you remember, when we were originally on Catbook or Chatbook, we had a socket.on inside the use effect. And then we switched to profile, which deleted Chatbook. And then we switch back to Chatbook, which creates another socket.on. So there's two now. And now when Buka logs in again, we can actually see this warning here on the right. Now, this isn't a terrible thing. You don't have to freak out about this if you see it in your own code. But it's saying warning can't perform a React state update on an unmounted component. It's because the original Chatbook, the first time we had the page open, is its socket.on is still active, but it's trying to update something that doesn't exist anymore. And so React complains about it. So the way we can actually resolve this is I'm going to go ahead and copy paste this callback into a named callback. So I'm just going to call it callback here. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this into the socket.on. And then I'm going to try and clean up this effect. So we may have, I forget if we mentioned this earlier, but inside of the use effect, you're allowed to return something. And the thing you return should be a function that takes no parameters. And what that function will do is it will be called whenever this component unloads or whenever this effect is reapplied. So you can delete whatever you want to undo before this ever happens again. So here we can actually use something that you don't really need to learn very well because it's not particularly relevant, but it may be useful to a few of you if you get to it. So here we can actually say socket.off, and if we pass in the same event name, active users, and the same callback, and it has to be exactly the same callback function object. So that's why we had to create a named variable here. So that way we could pass in exactly the same one instead of copying the code. And so now if we go ahead and repeat all these steps, and we switch out of Chatbook and then back into Chatbook, and then log in again. Looks like that, there we go. Something or other went wrong. I think this page hadn't fully refreshed. And I think that's still the warning from last time, so I'm doing a bad job of demo, sorry. But if I log out again, try switching to the profile here, back to chat, and log in as Buka again, we can see there's no error this time. Okay. So if you want to go ahead and git reset -- hard and git checkout w9 step 6, we can be all ready for the next step, which is going to be you guys coding again. So this time the goal is to actually implement that set active users function or set active user singular function. Again, this is setting which chat we're actually viewing. So it's which chat we've clicked on in the chat list, and we're now chatting with them on the chat component. So currently that function is just console.logging. And instead, I would like you guys to update it so that it sets the state of Chatbook. And you'll see here that it doesn't actually load the chat yet. That's something to fix later. But hopefully you'll be able to see that it becomes active in the left bar. You'll see it highlighted. And as a second step here, just figuring out how to load the message history. You'll see the page refresh, but it will currently be loading all chat, since in the server, that's all we've let it do. How are we feeling on the first item of the list? Pretty good? Somewhere medium? All right, definitely quite a few more minutes. Take your time. As a hint for the second part, there's a couple of different ways you can do it, but I think the cleanest way has something to do with use effect. And if you can avoid calling load message history more than once overall in the whole file, that's great. All right, how are we feeling? From pretty good, not so good, sort of meh all around. This is definitely a hard step. I think in the interest of giving you enough of a lunch break, I'm just going to go ahead and show you how to do it. But note that this is probably the hardest step in this whole workshop, maybe even all of the workshops up till now. So if we go ahead, make sure that you git reset hard, check out step 6. And if we look in chat book on line, what did I say? Line 96. Oh, I'm literally looking at it. We can try and replace this function here. And what we're going to do is if the user._id is not equal to the active chat.recipient._id. So if the user that we just clicked on is not the same person we're already chatting, because if we're already chatting with them, we don't need to switch to chatting with them. It's not a change in the state. So what we can do is then set the active chat to have a recipient. It's a user, or it's the user that we clicked on. And right now we're going to set them to have no messages because we're going to load those messages in. Now, one way to load these messages in, and it's a totally valid way, but not the ideal way, would be to just call load message history here. And we would call it on user. And that would totally work, except that this is sort of not ideal because we're combining concerns. And one of the things about React with hooks, all these functional components, is that we want to separate them as much as possible. And we already have a use effect that considers how to load the message history. Right now, it only happens when the chatbot component first loads. But what happens instead if I put in active chat dot recipient dot _id instead of just an empty array? Now we have a dependency. And so if you recall from one of the React lectures, what this means is that anytime the active chat ID or recipient ID changes, this use effect is going to be called again, which means we're going to load the message history again. So now we don't actually have to manually load the message history when we set the active chat. In fact, anywhere we set the active chat, the message history will automatically be loaded for us. So this is what I mean by separation of concerns. You don't have to worry about loading chat history if you're just trying to set the chat. So when we do this, we can take a look here. And looks like I have some kind of bug. Oh, it's because it still says all chat here. Or sorry, no, that's supposed to say all chat. To be quite honest, I forgot what I did wrong. Yeah, do you have an idea? Yes, we can actually do this, and that's probably, oh no, actually you're absolutely right. That is the problem. So we really should be saying active chat.recipient instead of all chat. And the reasoning here is that when we load message history, when we get that response back, we actually set the recipient to the person we just loaded the history for. So thank you. Thank you. I completely forgot. Yeah, so with that, now when we check here, and woohoo, now I can chat with myself, except that for some reason, chatting with myself, there's a whole lot of other people. And the reason here is because we haven't actually updated this on the server. So if we go ahead and git reset -- hard and git check out w8-step 7, that'll get you all caught up with me. And now we can go ahead and try and figure out where we went wrong in the server. And really, it's not that we went wrong, it's that, keep on hitting escape here. It's that we forgot to think about so in here in the get/chat API/chat route, currently we just automatically load in all chat. Sorry, I forgot to put a to-do here. So hopefully you can find this and follow along if you'd like to on line 83. But here, what we want to do instead is we don't want to just load all chat. Make sure I'm. Did I load the wrong step? That would make sense. That would indeed make sense. Thank you. Yeah, that would be why that was broken. Yeah, here we go. We have an actual to do here. And so instead of just setting the query to look for all chat, we can actually do something a little smarter. So if the rec.query.recipient._ID is equal to all chat. So if we're trying to chat with all chat, then sure, we can load the history with all chat. But otherwise, that means we want direct messages with one user in particular. So we're going to have to build a slightly more complicated query object. And in fact, I'm going to take this away so that I can define this query object outside of the if statement, so that way we can make another alternate query here. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to say query is equal to $or. And so this $or is a special MongoDB syntax to mean it could be either of the following two things, or the following any number of things. So one of the things is going to be that sender._ID is equal to rec.user._ID. So the person who's requesting is sending this, and recipient._ID is equal to rec.query.recipient_ID. So it's sent by us, and it's going to the person we're direct messaging. Or it could be the other way around. It could be sent by the person we're messaging and received by us. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, and rec.query.recipient_ID. And here it'll be rec.user._ID. And then we still go ahead and find all the messages that fit this query, whether it's the all chat query or this new direct message query. And then we go ahead and send all of those messages. So if we try this in the browser here, we looks like we have an error. Reading underscore ID of undefined. So what we can do here is what happened is that the user rec.user was undefined, which, as I said at the beginning of the lecture, means that you're not logged in yet. So it tried to load this stuff while we weren't logged in yet. In order to alleviate this, we can also add here a auth.ensure logged in. So actually, we shouldn't need to. I think I might just need to restart this server. But in case you're curious, that's how you would set that. Oh, sorry. It's actually because I said recipient dot underscore ID instead of recipient underscore ID. Unfortunately, there's all sorts of weird slight naming differences here. And as part of this query, we name it recipient underscore ID. So if I go ahead and save that, now my server is running happily. And if I try logging in again, we now see I have my own message history. However, one thing you might see here, if I log in as Buka Buka on the left, Buka Buka is just gonna sit in all chat. And what we actually see is that they just got my message that I sent to myself in my own direct messages to myself, and they see it in all chat. Buka Buka's in all chat. So that's sort of weird. We try reloading the page, and now it's gone. So it's sort of confusing. What the heck just happened? The problem here is that currently we're actually emitting all of these socket events to everyone. We still haven't actually set up the point of this workshop where we're emitting just to the person we care about. So I'm going to go ahead and git reset --hard and git checkout w9-step 8. And I actually wrote W9 this time, good. And what we can look at is in API.js again, when we post a message, right now we're still just doing Socketmanager.getIO.emit. And remember, this is sort of like shouting at the entire room instead of just whispering to one single person. So what we can do here instead is that we can actually we can simply take a look and see if this is the appropriate action or if we should really be direct messaging. So if rec.body.recipient, and in this case it is recipient._ID. And if that is equal to all chat, well, then we would want to emit this message to everyone. But in any other case, that means we're sending a direct message. So the first thing we want to do is actually send the message to ourselves. So the person who just sent this message is not actually going to show up in their chat history yet until they get a socket message telling them, hey, add this to your history. So the first thing we're going to do is say Socketmanager.get socket from socket ID rec user.user._ID. So this is getting our own socket, the person who just sent the message. And then we're going to emit to that socket a new message with the data, with the message data that they just sent. And we're actually not going to send to the person who we actually want to receive the message just yet. I'm actually going to leave that to you in the next step. But first, we can make sure that this actually works. So what we can see here is that if I log in both of these, and Buka Buka is again just going to be looking in all chat, and I'm going to send a direct message to Buka Buka. I'll send a message to Buka Buka. Hi, Buka Buka. And now we weren't supposed to see this. It's because I didn't even save the file. That's always an important debugging step. Quite honestly, it happens a lot, especially when you've been up late. Forgetting to save a file is a great way to accidentally lose about half an hour of debugging time. Well, if we try that again, hi, part 2. This time, we don't see that message here. And we actually didn't see it here either. Because once again, I seem to have an error. Cannot read properties of undefined, reading emit. It should be rec.user._ID. Oh, yes, that is quite a good point. Get socket from user ID. Yes, it's using the wrong method here. And this is the method that you'll really want to use yourselves. Thank you. So now that we fixed that, I can try this all again. And once again, if we send a direct message by 3, we now see it pop up here for us, and it no longer appears in Buka Buka's all chat, which is great because now our direct messages are actually private. But of course, if Buka Buka was looking at our chat and we say ASDF here, Buka Buka didn't get notified. They have to actually like refresh the chat here to actually see my new message. Another problem that we can see here is that if Buka Buka is just looking at their own chat, or actually, sorry, if Buka Buka is looking at their chat with themselves, we can send something in alt chat. So 1, 2, 3, and it's actually going to appear in Buka Buka's DM, which is again a little bit confusing. And this is also because when we broadcast to all chat, we're currently adding it into whatever chat we happen to be looking at, not whatever chat the message is actually for. So if we look over here in chatbook.js, we can see here that we need to filter out chats that don't belong in the currently active chat, the person we're actually talking to. And to avoid having to type out a ton of code, I've also written this one down. So what we can do here is we can say, if this is all true. So what this is saying is, if the person who received the chat is the person we're talking to and the one who sent it is us, or they're the one who sent it and we're receiving the chat, or we're currently looking at all chat and the message was sent to all chat. So essentially the 3 different ways that this could be the right chat to add it to. And so if that is the case, then we're going to set the active chat to include these new messages. And so now if Buka Buka is looking at their own messages and I send hi here, looks like I had some other error again. Well, what we can actually notice here is that this is actually a problem with how we're defining this function. This function actually is not doing what we think it does. And to clear this up, I'm actually going to copy this whole function here and move it inside of the use effect where we actually call. So over here down on line 71. So I'm going to copy this all in here, just so that we can see what's going on here. And the interesting thing here is, once again, this empty array here, which is saying we have no dependencies. So the problem here is that this is all being initialized only when chatbook is first loaded. And at that point, what is active chat.recipient? All checked, exactly. Which means that we're actually not going to, or we're always going to think that we're chatting with all chat. So we're going to get very confused. So what we can do instead here is a very simple solution that's sort of a little bit hacky. We can add some new dependencies in here. We can add active chat.recipient._ID, just as before, and props.user_ID. So this will make sure that whenever either of these things are updated, we're going to get this use effect again. And so now if we try logging in and send something to all chat, it appears in all chat, but it doesn't appear for Buka Buka in their direct messages. Sorry, I'm going a little bit over time on this one. I'll make sure y'all still get enough lunch. So I think I might actually cut out the next step where you were supposed to be coding and just do it here for you, just so that it goes a little bit faster. So if we want to go ahead and git reset --hard and git checkout w9-step 9, you'll see all the changes I just made. And now as the last step, this thing that we left out in API.js, where we didn't actually emit the message to the person who we actually want to send the message to. So what we can do here is we can go ahead and say, we don't want to emit the message twice. So if the recipient is the same as the user, like I'm messaging myself, I only want to get one of those messages. So I can say if rec.user._ID is not equal to rec.body.recipient._ID. And then we can say Socketmanager.get socket from user ID. We'll make that mistake again. And pass in rec.body.recipient._ID. So now we have the socket of the person we want to send to, and we simply emit a new message. And with that, when we load all the chat, and we have I'm chatting with Buka Buka, I can say hi Buka Buka again, and we'll see it actually finally shows up. And with that, we've actually finished Chatbook. We've done it all, and thank you guys for coding a large part of that. Hopefully this helps you get a sense of how you would use, as a reminder, when you want to sort of shout to everyone who's using your web app, use socketmanager.getIO. When you want to whisper just to one person, you can use socketmanager.getSocket, user ID, and .emit. And all of the code that you'll want to look at is in client socket and server socket. And if you want some more, just quick guides, that way you can you can know what to do when you're writing your own apps. You can go to weblab.to/socket guide or look at this slide. Thank you. Sorry for keeping you over. And I think